Are you in the mood for an action movie? The German film Blood and Gold has arrived on Netflix. So how was it? Desperate to return home to his daughter in the final days of World War II, a German deserter finds himself caught in a battle against SS troops on a mission to uncover hidden gold. The storyline reminds me a bit of Sisu, where you have this lone guy being pursued by an unruly and grotesque group of Nazi soldiers. There's also another story element that I'll get to in just a minute. It's a simple premise, but becomes engaging thanks to the pursuit and the character interactions that are introduced all along the way. Heinrich is quiet, but he's on a noble pursuit, so it's easy to root for him, especially as we watch him stand up and then protect those that can't necessarily do it for themselves. Now, there is a town that the Nazis are going towards that supposedly has a stash of gold, and they want to steal it to just set them up before the war ends. And this naturally creates a similarity to Sisu, but because the circumstances are different, it doesn't feel like a copy or a reproduction. Excellent action sequences are filmed wonderfully, with just these big, wide shots to show the crazy stunts that add an element of both excitement and danger. And while there are plot conveniences built in to allow the characters to move through the story unimpeded, the characters themselves, they don't always have plot protection. There's real danger and peril that the characters face, and I like that the story isn't afraid to create shocking instances to keep us on our toes and emotionally engaged. And then when there is violence, while a lot of it isn't lingered on or shown in great detail, there are times when a scene would call for a vivid picture of gore, and the camera doesn't shy away from it. There's also some good fight choreography, especially when the characters are in confined spaces. Now, they're not all continuous takes, but through most of the sequences, the editing doesn't cut, instead creating moments that last several seconds before cutting, rather than just an edit every half second or so, which we see happen in a lot of action movies. Now, this has a Western feel to it, with the loner taking on a gang of bad guys, while also getting involved with a woman who he feels he must protect. Now, the musical score, it helps to reinforce this tone, which I think is awesome. The score is moving throughout, and it's also ominous, and there's a sense of motion and dread that's working together. Now, something I like too is that the damsel in distress isn't actually helpless. I mean, just like we see in a lot of Westerns, the abandoned woman is much tougher than she appears, and in this, it provides the opportunity for more fun action. And following the Western genre, the final showdown is emotional and a bit intense, but it is over fairly quickly, which I would have loved for it to just be a bit more epic and drawn out. Now, this is a fairly quick watch at only an hour and 40 minutes, and even though this is similar to a Western, the pacing is deliberate and moving. It doesn't drag or even meander. I mean, there are moments that allow the story beats to breathe, but these also provide a good rhythm to the storytelling rather than feel like it's just a dip in the energy. Now, I loved a lot of the cinematography, showcasing the environments and helping to build out the town that becomes the arena for the final conflict. It's semi-deserted, a bit ravaged from war, and shown to be gritty and quaint, just not allowing for many areas to hide out. But at the same time, it does create a few hovels thanks to the destruction. Now, I enjoyed the muted tones that dominate the palette, mostly grays and earth tones, and even in the sky, it's a little overcast, or at least it's lacking vivid light to brighten up the colors. I think each of the characters are mainly strangers, where we never know too much about any of them. For our protagonists, I mean, we know enough to connect with them and understand their motivations. I was emotionally invested in their well-being, and I was rooting for them to succeed, and then more importantly, just to stay alive. Now, the bad guys, they're simple and one-dimensional, and because they're Nazis, we don't really need any additional info on their backstories to make them evil or villainous. I do appreciate, though, that despite lacking character depth, there are a couple that dive headlong into their vileness, and they embrace the characterizations so that they truly become just these horrendous individuals. Greed and hatred, that's their motivations, and they're palpable and evident. But one of the main bad guys, he reminds me somewhat of that Dr. Maru character in Wonder Woman. I mean, his physical appearance is meant to be unsettling and menacing, and it is a bit creepy, especially when we see how unstable he really is. There's a storyline involving the townspeople, and while it does provide the impetus for the plot, this is the weakest area of the movie. There's time devoted to following a few that are involved from the town, but their arcs, they don't really lead anywhere. We get a flashback that fills in story elements to make the plot as a whole make sense, but from there, the inclusion of these players, it feels more like a distraction than a meaningful contribution. And the overall arc, it is somewhat predictable, but I didn't find anything wrong with that. I mean, there are some surprises along the way, and enough complications that are created in the narrative to just allow for slight twists to the story. Now, these aren't going to shock you, but they add enjoyable elements to the storytelling to keep it moving and entertaining. So I think if you're in the mood for a violent pursuit movie, this can work. And framing a Western tale with a World War II backdrop makes for fun viewing, especially when the violence kicks in. There's not an overwhelming amount of action, but when it happens, the choreography and the editing are done exceptionally well to create intensity and energy without having a ton of quick edits to hide the lack of fighting skills. The story is certainly simple, and it's also not deep, but it does provide a couple of heroes worth rooting for, and most definitely provides villains we want to root against. This is great for more than a casual watch, but it may not be something that you revisit more than once. There's no sex, brief nudity, a lot of profanity, and a ton of violence, including sexual assault. I give Blood and Gold 3.5 out of 5 couches. So what are some war movies that you like to rewatch? Now, I love Inglourious Bastards and then also the series Band of Brothers, but let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.